Afternoon, Mr. Norn. Okay. Your mic is off.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Mr. Norn, before, when we broke at lunch, I was questioning you about your media press release, if I call it, or media statement of April the 23rd. And on that same date, you gave an interview to Mr. Ollie Williams, correct? Of Cabin Radio.
Ollie Williams?
Yes.
Sorry. Are we on to another exhibit?
No. I'm asking you if you remember that. First of all, Mr. Williams has already testified that he interviewed you on April the 23rd, 2021.
Yeah, I recall that conversation. It was really brief.
Okay. And first of all, before we get into it, how many times before had you spoken to Ollie Williams before April 23rd?
Maybe a couple times in some other stories. I remember his number showing, like the number showing up, and it looks similar to one of my relatives, and I picked it up, and I didn't realize it was Ollie. Had I known it was him, I very likely wouldn't have answered any calls because I just wasn't ready to take any calls from the media at that time.
Right. Yeah. Because you knew that you had tested positive for COVID-19, correct?
No, I just wasn't taking any media requests. No.
Okay. You're just not taking any media requests on April the 23rd, correct?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. So you're saying you weren't taking media requests on April the 23rd?
I didn't take that one in particular at that time.
Okay. But you do recall speaking to Mr. Williams on that date?
I did.
Okay. Mr. Williams has testified in his affidavit, which is tab 17, that he had a telephone conversation with you, Mr. Norn, and during that conversation, you confirmed that you had tested positive for COVID-19 along with a family member. You recall that?
Yeah, that's the media statement we're referring to?
No. I'm referring to what you told Mr. Ollie Williams. If you want to, you can turn up tab 18 of the book, and it's Exhibit 17 in these proceedings. Have I got that exhibit number correct, Madam Registrar? I think I do.
I got Exhibit A here.
Yes, sir. It's marked. It's marked Exhibit 17 at 9:50 on October 5th.
Okay.
And it's tab 18 in your book.
Okay, thank you.
I'm getting, sorry, you guys are crossing, you guys are walking over each other, so what did the...
Okay, I'm referring to the big exhibit book we prepared for you.
Yes, yeah, but like I said, it'll be a lot easier if these were actually had like continuous page numbers, because it's trying to really confuse and go back and forth, but I'll do my best.
Okay, well, we're looking at the affidavit of Ollie Williams, sworn September 10th, 2021, at tab 18, or document 18 of the documents book.
I see one for the 16th day of September 2020, and I know that was... It says this is Exhibit B.
No, it's not the documents that are attached to your transcript, but the document books that Dragon Toner prepared.
The big book, it's tab 18.
There we go. Let's try that.
Thank you, Mr. Barclay.
Much better. Thank you, Mr. Barclay. I see it now.
Okay, and this is the affidavit of Ollie Williams, and in his affidavit, do you have it in front of you?
Yes, I recall this
Paragraph
conversation.
3 says, he says, on April 23rd, 2021, I had a brief telephone conversation with Mr. Norn, and you acknowledge you did have a conversation with him that day.
Yeah, I remember that I was woken up by this call. Like I said, I was not sleeping very well during this time. Like I was so groggy and I was so tired. If I hindsight 2020, I would have turned off my phones during that time just because I needed to be rested and getting better.
But April 23rd was the same day as your press release, your media statement, right? We looked at before the break.
Yeah, that's what it says here. Yes.
Right. And he said, Mr. Norn confirmed he had tested positive for COVID-19 along with a family member. You told him that, correct?
I'm just trying to recall here. I think it was our brief conversation. Yes, I remember saying that. Yes.
Then, quote, Mr. Norn identified his self-isolation period as being between April 4th and 18th. Recall telling him that?
I don't actually. That part. I remember telling him about the family member.
Okay, but you don't recall saying that to him? You didn't? Is that correct? Is that what your evidence is?
That's correct, but yes.
But might have you?
I can't say for certain, Mr. LePrairie.
Okay. And I'm continuing on, and stated he stayed home until going to the Taste of Saigon on April 19th. And let me read that whole sentence in context. Mr. Norn identified his self-isolation period as being between April 4th and 18th and stated he stayed home until going to the Taste of Saigon on April the 19th. Did you tell him that?
Yes, I recall, and I remember this because I'm like, oh, yeah, you know what? I just realized that this is around the time, like this is where the timelines where my conversation with Mr. Rutland is important because I know that this was brought up, and yeah.
Okay, so you recall telling him that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, and so you recall telling him that you identified your self-isolation period as being between April 4th and 18th and stated he stayed home until going to the Taste of Saigon on April 19th. Is that correct?
Sorry, I'm just reading this again. That's correct.
Okay, and then he said, in regard to his compliance with the self-isolation period, Mr. Norn stated, quote, I stayed home. I followed the rules. I was upfront with everybody, end of quote. Recall saying that to him?
Yes.
Okay, but that wasn't true, was it?
As I mentioned before, this is like this is an early morning call, and again, it's not sleeping very well. I was very, very exhausted, mentally fried around this time period. I was tired.
So you may have said that to him, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you recall saying it to him?
From what I remember, like I said, I remember saying I stayed home. I mean, yeah, if that's what he says, that's very likely what I said.
Okay. So why didn't you tell him that? No. Well, actually, I went to the legislature on the 17th.
Like I said, I was tired. This is a call like, somebody calling you like first thing when you get up and you're kind of disoriented a little bit. And if again, hindsight 2020, I would have just told them to call back later. Like I was just not ready for this because I thought it was one of my relatives calling me.
Okay, but you knew that that during that period of time, April 4th to the 18th, you'd been to the legislature on the 17th, correct? So you didn't stay home.
Now we've been over this, Mr. LaPrairie.
Okay, but now we're talking about what you told to Ollie Williams of Cabin Radio.
Yeah.
Okay, and you knew that he is a reporter and he was likely to report this.
I don't know if these guys are CRT certified, but if he's a reporter, then yeah.
Your answer is yes? You knew he was likely to report this?
Likely, yes.
Okay. And you never told Mr. Williams that no, I didn't stay home. I actually hugged and kissed my daughter on April 8th.
Sorry, don't see that here.
No, you didn't tell. You told Mr. Williams that you stayed home, and you didn't tell him that you had hugged and kissed your daughter on April 8th.
No, and we're going back and forth here, so I just thought we were going to specifically speak to this affidavit. But okay, but I'll keep answering your questions.
Okay, well, but you never told him about hugging and kissing your daughter on April 8th.
No, I did not. That's kind of private, and I don't think a reporter needs to know about my dealings with my children. Really,
okay, and he reports here, and you've agreed that he might have said this. I followed the rules. That you said I followed the rules. You see that?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, you didn't follow the rules, did you, Mr. Norn?
Apparently, like I said, hindsight. Let me finish, Mr. LaPrairie. Like I said, hindsight was 2020 at the time, and I want to make this totally clear. I can't stress this enough. I probably slept for a period of maybe several hours during that period of time. Like when I went in isolation, I was completely exhausted, and people kept calling me, and this is a perfect example of it.
Okay, but you, back to my question, you had not followed the rules of your isolation at the time you were being interviewed by Mr. Williams.
No, at the time, like I said, hindsight's 2020, and we've been through this already. That I went into the ledge on the 17th.
Yeah. And if you were following the rules, you wouldn't have visited with your daughter on April 8th as well.
I wouldn't classify it as a visit. It was an encounter.
You hugged and kissed her.
She's my child.
Right. But she had just returned from a ski trip from British Columbia.
Is there a question?
Yeah, there's a question. Did you think you were entitled to hug and kiss somebody while you were in self-isolation?
Like I said, hindsight's 2020. If my daughter is screaming for my affection, I just saw my daughter and didn't even think twice about it. My daughter wanted my affections, and I haven't seen her in a long time. And again,
and you didn't, and Mr. Williams says, during the conversation of April 23rd, 2021, Mr. Norn did not mention having gone to the Legislative Assembly on April 17th, 2021. We've covered that. Or the Yellowknife Racket Club on April 18th, 2021. You never mentioned that to him?
No, like I said, it was just, I felt at the time I wanted to protect my privacy. Like I didn't really know where this was going, and I wanted to get out of the conversation as quickly as possible. Yeah.
Now, Mr. Williams testified that he authored an article which appears at Exhibit B to his affidavit. Could you look at that?
Yeah, I see it here. Yes.
Okay. And did you see that article at that time?
I didn't pay too much attention to the cabaret. I was told not to. Yeah, I had friends told me not to even look at social media because there was a complete blow up of social media around that time. It was ugly.
Okay, well, that's not my question.
It was a siege. Like online, it was nothing like I've ever seen. I remember that specifically.
Okay. But back to my question, did you see this article that Mr. Williams wrote?
Honestly, I don't recall. I remember maybe I did scroll through it and I saw like numerous comments, like just the vitriol. I'm like, okay, I can't. This is too much, and I didn't review it in detail. That's what I recall.
Okay, let's just look at the article, see if it refreshes your memory. This is an article entitled "Steve Norn says he and family member are this week's YK cases." And you do recall telling Mr. Williams that about your family member being the other Yukon case besides you.
Yukon case?
Okay. You recall telling Mr. Williams that the two cases that were outstanding of COVID-19 in the Yukon at that point, Yellowknife, sorry.
Yeah, we live in the Northwest Territories.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I meant Yellowknife.
A lot of people make that. A lot of people make that mistake with Yukon and the Northwest Territories.
Okay.
So,
okay, I apologize. I meant the Yukon. I meant the Yellowknife. And in Yellowknife, he says, Steve Norn, the MLA for Tuna Whitley, says he has tested positive for COVID-19 and a family member also has the disease. End of quote. You told him that, right? Or did...
If I did, yeah, if he said so, then I very likely did. Honestly, like I said, I don't recall that, but
Okay, let me actually suggest to you that he may have gotten that from your press release of the same date, because remember we looked at that.
yeah, he could very well have. You're correct.
Okay, and I apologize. That's probably where he got it. And then he goes on to say, no, the next page, turn the next page with me. Norn told, there's a picture there on the next page of you getting your Moderna shot.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Okay, and then he says, quote, Norn told Cabin Radio he received a positive test on Wednesday. And you recall telling Mr. Williams that?
Yes. And one thing I do remember about this article is like there is so much speculation, and I remember like I said, vitriol, the misinformation. There was all kinds of rumors. Since then, I know that Cabin Radio has stopped making comments on their pages, probably because of this very reason, just because it caused so much uncertainty, and I've never seen anything like this.
Okay, but back to my question. It says the question was the statement is Norn told Cabin Radio he received a positive test on Wednesday. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then in the second paragraph, it says Norn, who lives in Yellowknife, had traveled to the Alberta community of Grand Prairie for a family emergency at the start of April. He said he isolated as instructed from April 4th to the 18th before visiting Yellowknife's Taste of Saigon restaurant on April 19th a day after his isolation ended. You recall telling that to Mr. Williams?
Oh, so what? Okay, what page are we? Are we on page 20 or 3 of 6?
Just it's 2 of 6. That's right.
Oh,
I'll start
sorry,
again.
I got ahead of myself there.
You want me to repeat the question, Mr. Norn?
Yes, please.
Okay, and then I'm reading in the second paragraph, quote, Norn, who lives in Yellowknife, had traveled to the Alberta community of Grand Prairie for a family emergency at the start of April. And this is the line I want to refer you to. He said he isolated as instructed from April 4th to 18th before visiting Yellowknife's Taste of Saigon restaurant on April 19th, a day after his isolation ended. You recall telling him that?
No. Sorry, go back to what day was this interview?
This interview is on April the 23rd.
So I'm going to go back here a sec. No, I don't recall that.
You may have said it, but you don't recall.
No.
Your answer, I'm sorry?
No, I don't recall.
You don't recall, but you may have said it?
I may have.
Okay. And then the next page, second paragraph on the next page, and he's got this in quotes. I followed all the rules. I was upfront with everybody. Norn told Cabin Radio on Friday morning.
Yeah, that was
covered
that
that,
was.
but-
Yeah, we've already covered that. Yes.
Okay, and then he said he and his family member were doing well physically, but added he was mentally exhausted.
Yeah.
Does that
Honestly,
sound like something you
Yeah,
might have
it's
said?
like,
Because you,
yeah, like I said before, like I can't. Again, I'm going to say this like the 4th or 5th time now that I was trying to look after family members. I was going off sleep deprivation. I was extremely tired, and honestly, like my memories during this time are like vague at best during this time, and
okay, so you,
and it
so
was
you-
been Mr. LaPeria, sorry, and it's been so long with this conversation with Ollie, and it was brief, and I'm really not confident in my recollection with Ollie Williams.
but it sounds like something you would have said, that you were mentally exhausted. You just told us that you were at that time.
Yeah, it may have been something I said.
Asked, and then I'm continuing, asked what could have led him to remain infectious beyond the 2-week isolation period. He acknowledged his first thought had been, quote, how the hell did this happen? End of quote. Do you remember saying that?
I'm gonna go back to what I said before. Just like it's been a while, and yeah, everything was vague around this time for me. It really was. It was such a hard, mentally trying time. It was not a pleasant experience at all.
Okay, but that's not really my question. Do you recall him?
Just giving you context.
I'm sorry, Mr. Norton.
Just giving you context. That's all. I think that's important.
Okay, but do you recall saying to him, how the hell did this happen in terms of your infection?
I may have said that.
Okay. And then he says, quote, I did talk to a medical expert, Norn said. They said the variant could stay in your body for 17 days. End of quote. Do you recall saying that to him?
I may have said that, yes.
Okay. And then the next page, second paragraph, it says, Norn said he was coming forward because he realized residents would have, quote, all kinds of speculation end of quote, about what had happened? Might you have said that to him?
Yes, I think that was partly important. Like I really thought about that night before, and thought about what, as I mentioned before, what Madam Premier said to me, Carolyn Cochrane, about the importance of me coming forward. I'm like, and I thought, this probably the right thing to do. But again, hindsight's 2020. But we're here.
And then lastly, he said, quote, I stayed home, end of quote, he said, referring to residents' concern about whether isolation rules had been broken. You recall telling him that in terms of isolation rules that being broken, that you stayed home.
I may have said that.
Okay.
I think you should turn to the last line. That's really important, and you want to highlight that. I said I was just a little tired, mentally fried, and that's how I really felt.
And the last sentence says, I'm feeling okay, he said on Friday, just a little tired, mentally fried, end of quote.
That was
Right.
an understatement. That was, yes.
That-
I remember saying mentally fried. Now I remember that part. But it's like I said, it just feels like a blur around that time for me.
Okay. Now I'd like you to turn your mind back to May 4th, 2021, and the conversation you had with CBC News, Linny Limberink. Do you recall that conversation?
Vague. Again, like I'll have to just, let's go through that. I don't remember her name in particular.
Okay. Were you with us when we played that audio clip?
No, but I remember talking to CBC. I couldn't remember her name off the top of my head.
Okay. And Ms. Linny Lamberink testified, and if you look at tab 19 of your exhibit book, tell me when you've got it, Mr. Norn.
Yes, I see it in front of me.
Paragraph 3. Well, first of all, it's I, Linny Lamberink of the Yellowknife Northwest Territories, hereby affirm the following. And she says that, number 2, I'm a journalist employed by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I'm one of the CBC journalists who has been covering the allegations that Steve Norn had violated the territory's mandatory isolation rules. And then she says this, quote, on about May 4th, 2021, I had a brief telephone conversation with Mr. Norn. The bulk of that conversation was Mr. Norn trying to negotiate a later date for a formal interview. Toward the end, I informed him I was going to ask one question, which was whether he had in fact broken his isolation period after traveling. Mr. Norn admitted he had, but declined to answer further questions, saying he would speak during an interview the following day. You recall admitting to this journalist, Ms. Lamberink, on May 4th that you had broken your isolation.
I do remember that paragraph.
You say you do remember that paragraph. You remember speaking to that journalist and saying that.
I remember saying that.
Okay.
And like I
what
said,
were you referring? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I like I said, I remember. I did. Like I said, I wanted to give wholesome answers, and honestly, I was trying to get sleep, man. It was a very difficult time period. I was being bombarded by, again, emails, calls, messages, calls from the media, calls from family. A lot of support. Well, some supportive, some not exactly supportive, but tired.
Okay. Do you recall, you recall telling her that you'd broken your isolation?
Yes.
Okay. What were you referring to? What was in your mind at that time, May 4th, that amounted to you breaking your isolation?
That would be an alleged, very likely.
Yeah, the 17th, April 17th visit?
That's correct.
What about your visit with your daughter on April 8th?
I don't know. I don't. For at that point, I didn't want to tell any of these reporters about my family members. And I've been very protective of my family members up to this point, but it's still, we're still talking about them.
Okay. Now, you would agree with me that COVID-19 is a deadly and debilitating disease.
Mr. LaPerriere, I am not a medical expert, but I know that people have been getting ill from it just from my dealings. And just so you know right now, my daughter has it and my mother has it, and my mother is not doing very well right now.
Okay, but you
So,
know that COVID-19 is deadly. It can cause death,
yes,
and it can cause serious illness.
yes.
And that you yourself contracted COVID.
I did. I recall I had never even had a sniffle. And again, for the record, I asked repeatedly to get a second test, and I never did get one from public health.
Okay. And you knew that if you contracted COVID, that you could be a transmitter of it, that you could transmit it to someone else.
Yes, of course.
Okay. And you know and respect those people who set up the system to protect the residents of S.N.W.T from COVID-19.
Yes,
You were part of that group,
yes,
and that was through your being an MLA and also being the chair of the Oversight Committee, Accountability and Oversight Committee.
correct.
And you had implored the residents of the Northwest Territories through your Facebook and your Twitter communications, and as chair of the Accountability Committee, to try to stop the spread of COVID-19.
Correct.
And that you implored them to isolate when required by public health officials.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
And that you implored them to isolate when required and cooperate with public health officials.
Oh, you're referring to my video earlier that year, or
Right.
earlier? Yeah, yes, that's correct.
And that you, quote, if you have an isolation plan, please follow it religiously. That's something you said during your Facebook video, right?
Yes.
Okay. But do you think you practiced what you preached?
That's a good question. I honestly it felt like really confusing messaging from public health. And again, the alleged breach, my daughter, Sina, that was a lapse in judgment, I suppose. And, that it was like with my daughter, for example, that was just like a spontaneous thing. I just wasn't even like, I just saw my daughter and there was an afterthought. And like I mentioned before, when I went to the ledge, I shared this with my colleagues as well. I counted out the days, but again, hindsight is 2020. If I could do it all over again, I would have actually went out of my way to contact public health and just to confirm that.
Well, you at the legislature, you saw Mr. Brain, correct? The security guard, Mr. Brain, when you were at the legislature on the 17th, correct?
Again, yes.
Okay. And you heard the evidence that after he saw you, he logged in hundreds of people before he himself began to self-isolate. You heard that evidence.
Yes.
Okay. He saw many MLAs, including the Premier and the Health Minister, correct? Logged them in.
Correct. That's that's his job. Yes. And to be fair, Mr. Lepre, a lot of times when the members come in, they don't have that kind of close contact with our security personnel. Usually, during work hours, we walk in, we hit our cards in electronically. We have proximity cards. We have a station for wiping, and generally, we don't have close contact with security personnel.
But on the 17th, when you were supposed to be isolating, you went to the legislature and you contacted Mr. Brain. I mean, you were in the same space as Mr. Brain.
Yes, and we've been over this, and I don't know how other crystal clear you can be about this point numerous times.
But on reflection, can you see the risk that you created by breaking your isolation and going to the legislature on that day?
Hindsight, yes.
Okay, because you subsequently tested positive for COVID-19.
Oh, were you wanting a response?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah. Again,
And you saw and kissed and hugged your daughter on April the 8th during your isolation, correct? You told us that.
yeah, yes. Again, we seem to be going around in circles here, Mr. Lepre. I told you about several times that I went to the ledge, several times I had interactions with my daughter. I don't understand why we're going in circles here.
Your own daughter and your former common law wife contracted COVID. You heard them testify to that.
Yes.
And that your former common law wife had a tough time battling it.
Yes.
On reflection, can you see the risk you may have created with them by having that interaction with Sine that day?
Sir, I have to object. I don't see any probative value in asking that question. In essence, he's asking my client for his medical assessment of risk. It's quite obvious in the evidence that we've heard thus far that the likely patient one in that trilogy was his daughter, not him. He didn't test positive until 11 days later or 12 days later. And it's not a fair question, and I ask that it not be permitted.
Right. He was only tested at that point.
I'm going to allow the question.
Okay. So on reflection, can you see the risk you created by kissing and hugging your daughter in violation of your self-isolation protocol on April 8th? Can you see that now?
Yes, we've actually been over this already, but yes.
So do you not think you also misled the public through your press release saying you had been self-isolating on April 17th when you knew you hadn't been?
Again, during that middle of that week when all of this this craziness happened, I was so tired. A lot of my recollection during that week, I was so exhausted. But
let me ask you again. Do you not think, as you sit here today, that you misled the public through your press release saying that you had been self-isolating on April 17th when you hadn't?
at the time, no, I did not feel like I was.
Okay, but now you realize that?
On its face, it looks like it now, yes.
Okay. Do you think now that you actually misled the public when you told Ollie Williams of Cabin Radio that you stayed home and you followed all the rules and you were upfront with everyone?
Again, at that time, I was really tired. I was exhausted, and I vaguely remember that conversation. Like, it was just
Right. Right, but right now, do you not think that and reflecting on this, that you misled the public when you told Ollie Williams of Cabin Radio that you stayed home, you followed all the rules, and you were upfront with everyone when you were interviewed on April 23rd?
Good question. At the time, no, but now when we see all the dust settle, now it appears that way on its face.
Okay. And you heard the evidence that you never told the nurses investigating that you had went to the legislature, correct?
No, I think that came about through Glenn Rutland, and then Glenn Rutland, I think, apparently talked to the public health nurses. So,
Yep.
yeah, so that's how that came about, because I was confused
Right.
about the times.
Yes, but Stephanie Gilbert testified that you never told the investigating nurses that you had been to the legislature on April the 17th.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Stephanie Gilbert testified that you never told the investigating nurses that you had been at the legislature on April the 17th.
Yeah, I was, like I said, I got my dates mixed up around for when I went. And, and I just want to make it clear that I didn't consciously mislead the public. I didn't sit there and, it didn't work. It didn't pan out the way you're suggesting.
But you know from their testimony, from Ms. Gilbert's testimony, that they found out that you'd been at the legislature by speaking to Mr. Rutland. You heard her testify that.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. The reason I think what happened there was I remember talking to Glenn, and I don't know the exact dates. Like I said, really fuzzy around that time. I'm like, yeah, like I said, Glenn, I don't remember going in there, and I remember him saying, yeah, you went on Saturday. I'm like, gee, I counted the days, and it didn't, at the time, I didn't feel like it was.
Right, at the time, but now on reflection, you can see that you did not give the correct information to those nurses investigating, correct? You knew you had been to the legislature on April 17th.
Yeah. Again, around that time, like I said, when you're trying to recall things, if I probably got a proper sleep during that week, this would have been turned out a lot different, and people wouldn't be so confused. But like I said, I was under a barrage of. You have to understand, the context here, of how many people are trying to contact me, how many people are messaging me, the threats. And the messages, the hatred that was out there towards me. This is a very difficult time for me and my family, Mr. LaPrairie, sorry.
Okay, well, let me ask you again. So would you agree with hindsight that you should have told the nurses that you were at the legislature on April the 17th?
Yeah, if I was in the proper mental state, I would have told them. Yes, that's common sense. I would have told them. But the way I had my timelines, I got my timelines all mixed up. I was just fried. I was tired, sleep deprived.
You heard the evidence that from Stephanie Gilbert that you kept giving the nurses different information who were investigating. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, I do recall talking to a couple of different nurses, and I said, as soon as I could remember, like as soon as I get new information, like as soon as I get the timelines right in my head, I'll let you know, because I did go to a couple of places. I'm gonna go back, and they make you go back and check where you've been. They ask you where did you go? And then when they do their investigations, right? So
But you heard Stephanie Gilbert testify that you originally said you just had stayed home during that period of time, during the period of time that she was questioning you about, and that you subsequently told her that you had seen your daughter on April the 8th, but that you never told them that you were at the legislature on April 17th.
we've been through this a couple of times already. I mean, Glenn Rutland did refresh my memory when I talked to him, and again, I keep bringing this up to you, and then it doesn't seem to be getting through to you, Mr. LaPrairie, that I was very tired. I honestly felt like I wasn't. Like I said, it was all a blur during that time.
Okay, is there anything else? Okay. I have no further questions.
Cooper?
Yes, sir. I don't know if we want to take a break or not. We haven't gone.
Mike, let's take a short break, say for 10 minutes.
Okay, sir. And just before we do that, I want to make sure, and I'm as guilty as anybody in this regard, we can't forget that this is subject to simultaneous translation. I appreciate that the Chippewa language translation is not available until the end of each day, but we do have to pay due respect and due regard to the fact that we are, myself in particular, often speaking quite quickly and sometimes over each other, and it's incumbent upon us, particularly maybe me more than anybody, because I'm used to working with First Nations interpreters, particularly in the Northwest Territories. We need to stop and ask them how they're doing. And I don't know that that's happening. And I'm going to ask that we do a better job of checking with them. Mr. Norn may very well want to revert to his first language of Chipewyan, and we have to make sure that our interpreters are doing okay. And other than that, sir, how long is the break?
10 minutes, I think.
10 minutes, but the point you raised is well taken, Mr. Cooper. I'm going to ask the clerk to just check with the interpreter to see whether or not that they're able to translate, or whether we can do something different.
And if
I
there's
appreciate
a method,
their importance. We sometimes forget about the interpreters, but it's a critical part of the process.
normally I'm
we'll
terribly cognizant of them when they're in the same room. Doing these things remotely certainly changes the realities. And as long as there's a method by which they can communicate to you as the adjudicator, if there are any issues, and sometimes that will happen, particularly over long days and a long week.
Thank you.
Thank you. 10 minutes?
This hearing stands adjourned for 10 minutes. resumed.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. We're down to one interpreter today, but he's quite confident that perhaps we have one or more breaks, but he's quite confident to ensure that that his work will be, everybody will be pleased with it.
Sir, I understand it's a bit more serious than that. I was watching the chat that came up. I understand that he is considered, not without some irony, a COVID contact is what I saw on the chat.
That's the other interpreter, yes.
Yes,
But
and
the interpreter that's there is prepared to go on today, and he's quite comfortable doing that. So
the reason I'm raising it as a separate issue is simply that Mr. Unka may be able to power through today. We have to consider how this is going to impact if this goes into tomorrow. I don't think it's fair or expected that an interpreter on his own would be expected to do a full 6 or 8 hours of interpreting.
well, I suspect they're looking for another interpreter right now, but we'll have to cross that bridge in the morning.
Okay, am I free to proceed then, sir?
You can go ahead now, Mr. Cooper, with your examination of your client.
Mr. Norn, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's great. So you heard what we said about the interpreters, and one has now departed for the day, and we still have one interpreter that will be interpreting.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Mr. LaPrairie went through a bit of your background. I just want to bring you to the point where you were a newly elected first-term Indigenous MLA in 2019, I believe.
That's correct.
You said you had worked at the Legislative Assembly in a different capacity in the past before that, is that right?
Yes, that would be around 2014, 2015 when I was a summer student in university as a constituency assistant.
And
For the
how long did you work at the Legislative Assembly in 2014?
Oh, not long, for a few months during my summer break.
Did you attend any sort of orientation or training sessions at that time in that role?
No, I don't recall ever taking sort of any orientation. We were given sort of like a little, like a binder, like I was basically just thrown into the fire.
So who were you working for at the time?
MLA Steve Norn for the same riding. Oh, at the time it was called a two-net riding.
Just lead me through your first few days or weeks as a brand new MLA. You walk into the Legislative Assembly. What are your impressions? How did you feel? How did it make you feel?
It was, I remember it was a really busy time. We were all just getting to know each other. It was a feel-good atmosphere. It was exciting, knowing that, I worked very, very hard to get to that point in my life.
Was there a certain energy in the air with everybody elected or re-elected, as the case may be?
Oh, yes, it was. I remember we had like an orientation dinner, I think that week at the Copper House, where we all kind of just in an informal setting just got to know each other, and it was a good week.
You said you had an orientation dinner. What was the nature of that dinner?
So all of the newly 19 elected members went out to the Copper House, and the clerks there, they gave us these pins from what I call like their little, I think like a similar to like a tie pin brooch type of kind of jewelry, and yeah, I remember that, and it was just like I said, very informal, it was a very fun dinner.
Did you and the other MLAs talk about your roles as MLA and what they might?
No, it was, like I said, it was more informal at the time. We brought our spouses for of us that did have spouses, and we brought them along as well, just to get everybody to know each other.
Okay, so that was a social event back in 2019, just after the election.
Yeah.
When did the work start?
The work started pretty much like right away. I think we went right into, I'll have to take a look to my memories to give exact dates. I know that we got elected in the first week of October. Then I think right away we went, one of the first orders of business, I'm pretty sure we did an orientation on that time. And then we had like a dinner with one of the Aboriginal governments. Or sorry, not a dinner, a breakfast kind of meeting.
Okay, so let's focus on orientation. As a new MLA, did you have education or orientation sessions separate from those who were re-elected and therefore not new MLAs?
Yeah, I think a couple of the more experienced members didn't bother attending because they understand the inner workings of the ledge.
And what sort of topics did you go through during your initial orientation?
Oh, everything from, legislative procedures, motions, decorum, rules, our roles as newly elected MLAs. One of the big things we went over is the handbook is something that we went over in detail.
Who led you through the member's handbook?
The clerk staff, the office of the clerk.
Okay, who specifically? Do you remember?
I remember.
Excuse me for interrupting. Excuse me for interrupting, but we have no court reporter at the moment.
I'm here.
My
Did you
bad.
mean interpreter?
I apologize. No, I meant court reporter. Thank you, Jenna.
Okay.
Just so that we're clear, Madam Court Reporter, did you record everything that I've asked of Mr. Norn and that he responded to?
Yes, I've been here all day.
Okay. Okay, so just going back to where I think we left off before the interruption, I was asking you if you recalled specifically from the clerk's office who was providing you with your training, your orientation.
Oh yeah. No. Okay, no. Refresh my memory. So we dealt with Glenn Rutland. I know that Tim Mercer was a big part of that. Danielle Mauger, and Kim Wickens did a lot of our we went over things like pension benefits. I know that even the spouses of the newly elected MLAs were also given orientation.
And specifically, I think I was a little bit more specific in my question. Who specifically led you through the handbook that you mentioned, the member's handbook?
Oh, that might have been Tim and Glenn.
Tim Mercer and Glenn Rutland?
Yeah, we went through the entire. Yeah, I have a copy at someplace, electronic copy. Yeah.
And how did Mr. Mercer describe his office and its responsibility to you as individual MLAs?
I think one of the biggest roles they have is to be support for for the MLAs. If we have any issues with everything from our computers to, if we need a legal opinion, if we on a certain piece of legislation, if we wanted to work on, private members bill, for example, we'd have to go to someone like Tim Mercer, who would refer us to like law clerk, and we're given a certain amount of hours a year to use the law clerk.
Who's the law clerk?
It was Sheila for a time, and another person was there for a bit, but she had to leave, and somebody else is there now. But I think Sheila's back in that role again.
Do you remember who the law clerk was back in 2019 when you were first doing your orientation as a new MLA?
No, I think it was Sheila at the time.
Sheila McPherson.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember any of the information that Ms. McPherson gave you with respect to your responsibilities being a new MLA?
I'd have to look through the handbook again, but I know that we did a lot of. We were told about how many hours we're allowed for, to use the law clerk's office. the exact reason what we can use them for. There's very strict rules on like what we can use the law clerk, the law clerks for.
Were there any such restrictions with respect to using the staff at the clerk's office? Were you limited in the number of hours or the areas of
Yeah. Oh, again, that you're giving me something very specific. I think it's either 20 hours of how much we could use them for. 20. We're allowed 20 hours, I believe. But that's something that'll need to be fact checked. Yeah.
Did you get an indication from Mr. Rutland, Mr. Mercer, or Ms. McPherson as to what sort of assistance they could provide? I know you've touched on a little bit of it. What sort of things could you go to them to assist you with as a new MLA?
We were told to, for a lot of you were assisting if we have any, we have we have benefits and stuff like that. So let's say if one of our spouses became ill or had some sort of issues that came up, that we could go to the clerks, even ourselves. We could go to them if we have any sort of legal issues, no matter what that may be. We can go to them. We were told, and this is before the cabinet assignments, we were told about things like legislative privilege, those sort of things. That's the kind of topics we talked about in orientation.
Did you, as a new MLA, receive any counsel or instruction or education with respect to how to deal with the media?
Yes, we touched on that for a bit too. Like I said, it was 2 days of the orientation, and I remember talking about the media. Yes.
Do you remember who delivered that information?
I'm gonna say Danielle Margaret. I'm pretty sure did that at the time. That I know that she does heads up public affairs. I'm pretty sure she did at the time.
And she was a member of the staff at the clerk of the Legislative Assembly's office?
Yeah, she runs the public affairs, does a lot of that part of the ledge. She's very good at it.
Did she indicate to you that you could come to her if you had questions about the media, social media, interviews with the media, anything like that?
Yeah, I remember we were going through branding at the time too as well. So we had to clear any of if we had any websites that we had up and running, we had to make sure that we had all our branding all the same, and things like everything from our business cards to that sort of thing. We had to go through public affairs.
Any instruction or direction with respect to social media content and posting on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, anything like that?
I think it was more broadly covered off in the members handbook that we gotta remember that we're always in the public. We're always going to be a public eye. I think that was one thing that was driven home. Once you get elected into office, the message was you are the public eye, and even some of your members of your family will be, part of that. I think that was some.
Did you get any sort of instruction or guidance with respect to how to deal with media requests?
Yeah, at first, for a lot of that stuff that we got, for a lot of our whenever we got something email like that, was generally just to be safe, because for me, I can only speak for myself, because I'm not used to dealing in the media in that capacity, so I made sure that I was always following my P's and Q's and make sure that I was doing things the way we're supposed to be doing in the ledge. And for a lot of my media requests at the time, I was taking them to public affairs.
By public affairs, you mean somebody at the clerk's office?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and if I refer to the clerk, you understand I'm talking about the clerk of the Legislative Assembly?
Correct.
Okay. Were you given any guidance or instructions on how to deal with the media interview that you wanted to reschedule? So the media phones you and says, I want to talk to you, Mr. Norn, about something. Were you given any guidance on how to deal with that scenario where you preferred to speak to the media at a different time? You're muted. You're still muted.
That was weird. I did not touch anything.
Okay, so go ahead. We didn't hear.
So how much, like for how long did they go on mute for?
Just you were answering my question. So just answer the question about information or guidance that you received on how to deal with a media request where you wanted to delay the interview.
Oh yeah, I don't recall having that type of conversation. I don't think we ever got that in depth. But like I said, anytime we had media requests, usually I went to the clerk's office.
And did you feel when you were originally an MLA that you were getting good support with respect to media interactions from the clerk's office?
It was really good. You know, guess you'd want to call it the honeymoon phase of our term.
Did you find yourself relying on advice from the clerk's office with respect to media matters?
Yes.
Were you given any advice or instructions when you made mistakes, political mistakes, other types of mistakes as a public figure?
Oh, like we're like at the beginning, I always looking for feedback, and I did have a CA that I depended on to them at the time early on, and they were very good. They my CA here in Yellowknife, Pascal, has worked for my predecessor Tom Bolio, and he recommended. So if I trust Tom's judgment, and I hired him on. He was good. I generally went to him, and my campaign manager when I got elected. He's since resigned. He's gone on to other opportunities. Thomas Lafferty, he was also somebody I depended on for political advice.
Did you build any sort of relationship or rapport with Mr. Mercer or Mr. Rylund at the clerk's office?
Yeah, I think the way, like you said, honeymoon phase was always important to just, because we were new, like a lot of us were new to this, and we depended heavily a lot on their advice in terms of legislative procedure and stuff. Because a lot of times when we went, say for example, like when we had our first session, we got our speeches drawn up, we got it proofread, and they helped out just to help us out with the initial our speeches, and to make sure that we're like not talking out of turn, and make sure that we're sticking to our the way they do business at the Legislative Assembly in session.
Is it fair to say that you were depending on people at the clerk's office to do a good job as an MLA initially?
Yeah, that would be a fair assessment, yes.
Did you have somebody at the clerk's office that assisted you with matters of protocol as an MLA?
Yes.
Who was that?
Glenn Rutland was the main go-to, especially in when I was chair of AOC. So just to give you some timelines, so when we first get elected, we don't have any portfolios. We haven't formed the executive yet, but we still have to have the territorial leadership, the TLC we called it, and it's a lot like the conclave with the Vatican. That's how we choose our premier and our executive. I chose at the time because I wanted to be advocating, and I didn't want to be part of the executive. I chose to not run at the time.
And did you or were you able to turn to anybody at the clerk's office with questions, legal questions?
Yes.
What sort of legal questions did you understand you were able to bring to the clerk's office as an MLA?
If we ever wanted to get a legal opinion on any of our initiatives, i.e. a private member's bill, that's something that we always had to kind of defer to those folks to help us walk us along, because again, a lot of us are new to this, and it's about drafting. There's a lot of drafting involved and that sort of thing.
What were you told were the resources in the case of a personal crisis as an MLA?
I was told to, if we run into like any sort of issues, we need to always go to the clerk first off.
So when you were first elected in 2019 as an MLA, you understood that you had the right to go to the clerk in the event of a personal crisis. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what was your understanding of what would happen had you gone to the clerk with a personal crisis, assuming that the clerk would not necessarily be the solution for the crisis? What did you understand his role was in assisting you?
Well, they definitely give some like sound advice, like, you know, if we needed to, for whatever, like it could be anything, right? I mean, like for like, you know, like I said, like I don't know what to do with these benefits. I'm like, or I could be a spouse having a crisis. Like, oh, this is somebody you can go to. Like, I know that just the person to go to. That's sort of advice I usually got.
Okay, so it sounds like what you're describing, the clerk's role in the case of personal crises is more of a gateway to other resources. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yes.
Did anybody at the Legislative Assembly give instruction or counsel to new MLAs about what to do in the case of personal crisis, alcohol problems, drug problems, mental problems, family crises, anything like that?
Yes, they did provide those supports.
And that was all through the clerk's office?
That's correct.
And that was all through Tim Mercer while he was in the position of the clerk of the Legislative Assembly?
Yeah, that was generally the role of the clerk, yes.
Jumping ahead to April 2021, were you still able to depend on the clerk?
I have one question. I apologize for
By all means,
interfering. It's just dealing with this new member's orientation, Mr. Norm. I had the privilege for 2 terms for 10 years of being the Conflict of Interest Commissioner for the province of Saskatchewan. And I was very involved in the new members' orientation, where I would lecture on ethics and conflicts. And over and above that, our legislation is such that I would have to meet with the individual MLA every year to discuss those issues and through his or her financial returns. And I think that was quite helpful to the members. I wonder if you had an analogous situation in the territories.
You know that, Mr. Barclay, it's very correct. Yeah, that's one thing that we had to do is we had to sit down with the Integrity Commissioner and make any sort of like financial declarations to make sure that we don't have any conflicts of interest down the road in our business. Because, as you know, a lot of us deal with a lot of different businesses, organizations, etc. You know, so we had to declare if we had we had to declare what all our assets are, where our assets were sitting, and that's what we did. That's correct, Mr. Barclay.
Yeah, I thought it really worked because I thought my mandate would be to keep the MLAs out of trouble. And if you had that relationship, it really helped. Sorry, Mr. Cooper, you go ahead.
Oh, no, thank you, sir. It was important clarification. And I managed to skip one thing that you've now reminded me. But just following up on Mr. Barclay's comment, did you see the role of the clerk's office as at least one of their functions to keep you MLAs out of trouble?
Oh, yes. I think I wouldn't say that. I think there were more of... I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe it. You know, they're there to assist us, to make sure that we understood what our roles are and understood what the rules are. And I think the one thing that was driven home was, you know, like we're held to a higher standard, and that we're always going to be watching, but just to make sure that we know make sure we stay within our parameters of our job, and if we weren't sure about those parameters, we absolutely they're there to let us know.
Is it fair to say they're your first and most important resource in that regard?
That's correct.
One of the areas that I didn't cover with you with respect to the clerk's roles, did you understand that the clerk's office had any function in terms of conflicts resolution, whether it's between MLAs or between an MLA and the public, or even an MLA and staff? Did you understand that the clerk's office had any role in helping resolve conflicts or even to avoid conflicts that might arise in your role as MLA?
That would be fair to say, yes.
And did you have opportunity to use the clerk's office for the purpose of attempting any conflict resolution?
Can you repeat the question?
Did you ever have an opportunity to use the clerk's office in order to help you resolve a conflict as an MLA?
I have to think about that, and I don't recall ever. I just remember mainly using him just for just like a lot of just day-to-day stuff. Like a lot of a lot of us had a lot of legislative questions and procedural questions. That's mainly what we leaned on them for.
But you knew that they were there as a resource for you as an MLA. You knew that.
Yes.
And it sounds like you depended on that.
That's correct.
Eventually, it's no secret that that relationship and dependence deteriorated to the point where you ended up filing a complaint against Mr. Mercer, correct?
That's correct.
So at the point that you've complained about Mr. Mercer, were you able to depend on the resources of the clerk's office to fulfill the function that you've just described?
Yes, yes, we did. There was still like the acting clerk. There's a few of them that we could still go to for procedural advice and whatnot, and to be there for our support.
Were the people that you could go to for support inclusive of Mr. Mercer at that point?
I can't say that I knew that they were a very, very tight-knit team, and that they appear to be very loyal to each other.
Let me put it differently. In April of this year, was your relationship with the clerk's office such that you could rely upon them to support you in times of difficulty as an MLA?
Actually, probably closer after I did, when I became no longer the chair of the AOC, it was, the relationship changed.
Did the relationship change from your perspective in response to the complaint that you filed against Mr. Mercer?
It's very likely.
From your perspective, I'm not asking you to perceive this from Mr. Mercer's perspective. From your perspective, were you still able, after you complained about Mr. Mercer, to go to Mr. Mercer for advice and support?
No, I could not.
What about Mr. Rylund? Could you go to him for advice and support after you filed the complaint about Mr. Mercer?
Yes, I still did.
Did the relationship between you and Mr. Rylund change in any way after you filed the report or filed the complaint, about Mr. Mercer?
Yes, I want to say strained, but there was definitely changes. Yeah, it was definitely different. I could definitely categorize it as, or characterize it as different.
Is it fair to say that as MLAs, you depended on each other for advice, support, and direction?
Yeah, it all depended. Like in any workplace, there's always going to be people you'll gravitate towards to and get along with. And I could say there are a couple of members I could speak to and confide in.
When you were a new MLA and with the the adrenaline of being elected or newly elected, as each MLA would have been at the time, were you able to rely on most or all of your fellow MLAs when you were first in office in 2019?
When first in office, I think there was a lot of I remember us working on our mandate exercises. We're still not there's no cabinet or no premier at the time, and like I said, we're still figuring out what was going on. There was a lot of jockey and a lot of campaigning, as you would if you're running for any other office. That still happened.
Okay, and so once the cabinet is installed by the votes of the MLAs, and once the premier is installed by the votes of the MLA, you're now a divided house between cabinet, premier on one side, and the ordinary members on the other, correct?
Yep. And then right around that time, I recall us we still had to do our committee assignments.
And I want to focus on the support structures as they were and as they evolved. And that's really what I'm talking to you about, Mr. Norn. So at the beginning, once the division occurred between the cabinet and the premier on one hand and the ordinary members on the other, what was the collegiality like? How did the ordinary members get along and support each other back in 2019 and early 2020?
Oh, I think it was amicable. I think we understood what our roles were as regular MLAs, and that our main job as regular MLAs is to hold the executive, the government, to account. I do say that the executive the branch don't have a whole lot of dealing with the clerk's office per se, because they have a lot of other resources behind them with their support staff as well.
But am I to take from that the ordinary members depend more on the support and services of the clerk's office than the cabinet and the premier?
That would be a fair assessment, yes.
Okay. I just want you to take your politician's hat off for a moment. And as you're dealing with the other ordinary members of caucus, were they part of your support structure early on in your tenure?
Early on my tenure, caucus. So you're referring to all 19 members?
But you tell me. I'm trying to determine whether there's a distinction between the whole caucus and the ordinary members.
Okay, so maybe just a little bit of education. So caucus is all 19 members. We take our hats off, even as the executive, and in the spirit of a consensus government, we still sit down and try to hash out any issues that we have, like with whatever initiatives we have going on at any given time, legislation, etc. Any issues that might be having under our roof, we usually deal with in caucus.
What was your support structure within the House in the early months after your election? Who did you rely on for support? And I don't mean politically.
Support structure. So CAs are obviously are kind of our first line of defense, for lack of a better word, our first line of dealing with constituents. They usually field calls for us because it's very, very busy. Like when you get into office, because you've got to take obviously calls, emails from each other, from other governments. You're pulled in many different directions, and it's we definitely had to depend on also the clerk's office to get some guidance and just ask. We generally went for them for advice as well, to just keep us in those parameters that I mentioned before.
Okay. And how did that support structure for you change from your early months up to March and April of this year? Did it get better? Did it get worse? Did it change?
It deteriorated pretty rapidly.
To what point?
Well, it came to my attention that there was some criminal acts that were happening in the ledge, and I remember talking to some witnesses to these alleged acts, and I remember seeing the fear. How scared they were. I had people crying to me, coming to me, and I felt I needed to do something about that. And there was allegations made in the clerk's office. And when I first called it out, it was strange because it just seemed like it was deflected. It was being swept under the rug, and I can't watch that. One of my witnesses, sorry, he's not my witness, but one of the witnesses, I won't mention his name, but is not with us any longer.
Who's that?
Mike Birchall.
So you say that the support structure deteriorated. In what specific ways did you find your support structure as an MLA deteriorated?
Just we had board of management. They suggested that we try to get some mediation going, but after my observations, they still kept coming. I felt that that mediation wouldn't work out between myself and Mr. Mercer, and it was messy.
Did you feel supported as an MLA at that point?
Aside from my CAs, no, I didn't feel it the same way. It was not the same.
And roughly when was this happening? What month?
What month?
Yes.
So when this first started, this was probably in November 2020, I'd say. And that it was late 2020.
As issues were developing between you and Mr. Mercer, did you feel that you could still depend on him or his staff for guidance and support on issues as they arose as an MLA?
Yeah, at the time where I just mentioned, like I still could, I still went to Mr. Rylund. He was very helpful at the time.
And did that change?
And recently it has, yes.
What changed such that you didn't feel you could any longer depend on Mr. Rylund for support?
We've had some a lot of I guess exchanges online. I was it was difficult.
In April of this year, I think it's fair to say you found yourself in a bit of a media firestorm as a result of your out-of-territory trip. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, my initial thoughts were like it just didn't seem proportionate. I was made to. I felt like a pariah, and I had people that wanted me thrown in jail, and wanted me to, to be punished, and it just didn't seem proportional. And then speaking candidly, in our justice system, we have crimes as serious as treason and murder, and then going down a little further, like, common crimes like, your assaults, crimes against a person, property crimes like thefts, you kind of go down that scale. And then you've got the lesser, like the kind of like the lesser, for lack of a better word, infractions like your SOTIs, your summary offense ticket infractions. I think that's the correct how they're created or how they're named. And you have that kind of spectrum, and it just seemed like for this whole ordeal, like including this inquiry and I'm trying to be respectful as possible. It just seems like I'm doing something treasonous here, and like that I'm disrupting the government in some way, shape, or form. That's the sense I got.
Are you getting currently a lot of support from the people around you?
I did get this is public that the chiefs from the YKDFN, one of them is no longer in office, so there's one new chief with the YKDFN. They asked for my letter of resignation, and the timing of it was very ill-timed. The chiefs from Lutselke and Denyukwe are in support.
Let me be a little bit more clear. Forget Steve Norn, the politician, for a moment. Steve Norn, the person. Are you getting a lot of support? Are you getting a lot of moral support, social support, family support?
Yeah, it's right now, like I said, right now where people around me are isolating. It's difficult for me. But I remember when I came out of isolation, and I went for a drive. One of my first drives in downtown Yellowknife, and a stranger came up to me and said, Steve, you're doing good. You keep your head up. You keep doing what you are doing, and that was encouraging because even when there was all this vitriol, all this hatred, all this misinformation, there's a lot of people that are very, very supportive. I still have people that that waved and sent messages, and they were happy to see me, and so that gave me a little bit of hope.
From whom is the vitriol coming?
Honestly, I got so many anonymous messages on like a lot of fake accounts online, for example. A lot of like blocked. I remember seeing a couple blocked numbers from getting threats. So I honestly can't say where they were, but if I had to suspect, they're probably from here in Yellowknife, but I can't say for certain.
Are you getting support from your fellow MLAs?
I am from a few.
How many is a few, Mr. Norn?
I'm going to say with certainty. Just give me a moment. I'm just going to think about this. Three.
And what is the reaction of the other MLAs, the others other than the three?
There's not a lot of support there. No.
Are they any part of the source of the vitriol to which you previously referred?
I can't speculate. I can't say that for certain.
Okay, I'm not talking about specific messages or notes or anonymous communications, but are you getting any form of hostility from your fellow MLAs other than those three?
Yes, I would say that there's a lot of opposition to me right now.
And what's the form of that opposition or hostility?
Well, not a lot of communication too much anymore. I've had again, I don't want to mention any members specifically, but they asked me to step down. They're telling me that I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm still staying my course. I really, really feel I'm doing the right thing, and that, I'm just hoping that we get some resolution, and hopefully work in harmony the way government should work.
I'm going to take you back to April in particular. Were you getting threats back then?
Yeah.
What sort of threats?
My threats against, just people like, you better watch your step, that sort of stuff. again, like there was so much stuff online. Like I do have I did get some screenshots of it, you know, and that's when like family and close friends would tell me, once you get out of isolation, do not go anywhere alone, Steve, because we're concerned for your safety. That's how bad it got. I remember my vehicle being tampered with, and I reported that. It was nothing major. I thought my tank did get sugar put in its gas tank, but it wasn't. It turned out to be nothing there. But it looked like there was little things happening, like my fuel tank the door was being propped open, and you could only open it from the inside. That this little things like that were happening. Yeah.
Anything more serious? Where you felt threatened?
Yes, I did get this reported. People wanting to threaten me, like to beat me up.
How was that communicated to you?
It was communicated. I recall seeing a text, and I just gave that to RCMP. They never followed up with me, so I don't. There's probably unfounded, but I still had to report it.
Did you report any of these threats to the clerk's office?
No, anytime we have any sort of security items like this, we just generally take it to the sergeant at arms, and what their process is, if we can identify who the person is, they are barred out of the building, or if they set foot on the premises, they're reported. That's just to protect the members, because just the nature of our jobs.
Okay, did you go to Mr. I think it's Mr. Thagard was the sergeant at arms? Did you go to Mr. Thagard with any of these threats?
Yeah, I went to him with one for sure. One of the other ones I didn't get to hear back from the RCP, so I didn't worry too much about it. But like I said, we were told that anytime we get these sort of threats, we have to let the clerk know. So that's what I did.
Did you feel threatened personally in April as a result of the information swirling around about your trip out of the territories and the consequences of your return?
Yeah, it was a frightening time. You know, I told my colleagues I wouldn't wish this on anyone. You know, as Northerners, we support each other. That's the way we've always done things in the North. You know, if there's any crises that you see somebody falling, people make mistakes, and like I said, it was a very frightening time, because especially for like things like COVID, we were learning. This wasn't some sort of static event. This is a dynamic event that was happening on the fly very quickly, and there was so much information out there, and it was frightening for me, frightening for my family. And at one point, none of my kids were in the Yellowknife school system. I got my kids out of Yellowknife and.
Was that in connection with what was going on in April?
Yes.
You had to move your children out of the school system because of the circumstances in April of this year?
Yeah. Yes.
Did they receive threats as a result of what happened in April of this year?
I know that they were afraid. They felt threatened. So they did all communicate that to me. They again, like things died down after a couple of months, so that was kind of a good thing. I will say that my youngest is back in Yellowknife, but she's still in isolation. I think she just came back from Regina, and should be done with her isolation fairly soon.
Now, Mr. Norn, you made the comment that people in the Northwest Territories support each other. Did you feel supported as April and May rolled out?
No, I think my ultimate, like the really, really like frightening part was when when you first hear about this and you're in isolation. I wasn't allowed out. Like I said, there was a guard outside. I couldn't even get any fresh air, or like go for a walk outside and just get some exercise. Even though like I was COVID positive, I was under the belief that we could still use a mask, and at least there's like a little separate. At the time, I think there might have been a separation area outside the isolation center where I was staying, and yeah.
So, Mr. Norn, you mentioned that you make mistakes, and I think in your examination by Mr. LaPrairie, you admitted a couple of mistakes. Let's touch on those. You talked about a brief interaction with your daughter, Sina. When Ms. Schwint told you that she was going to drop by with your daughter, what were you planning to do?
Honestly, I just thought it was just going to be say, hey, like a little. Like, I thought she was going to roll down a window. That's the way I envisioned it. Just wave, and I'm like, hey, I'll see you when I see you. Like, I should be done soon. But my heart melted when my daughter just was so excited to see me, and I didn't even think about it. It was my daughter. Like, she wanted my affection, and
The truck pulled up to your house. On which side? Which side of the truck were you on? The passenger side or the driver's side?
so I walk out of my house. It's facing. So where I was staying, it faces towards Northern Fancy Meats, and Natasha was driving towards the multiplex, kind of that direction. So the passenger side was very close to the curb, so I didn't have to walk around to see Sina.
You had your mask on as you approached the vehicle, I understand?
I can't say 100%. I don't recall. I'm almost certain I did. I don't recall.
As you exited your house, did you intend to approach your daughter close enough to give her a kiss?
No, I took a few steps, like came within like maybe 10 feet, maybe around there, and then she just reached out. She thought I was gonna, maybe perhaps my daughter thought I was gonna approach her, but she's just reached out and yeah, give her a hug and give her a kiss.
How old is she?
She was 9 at the time. She's 10 now.
Did you run towards the vehicle or walk?
I walked fast. I wouldn't say a jog, but it was just a brisk walk, I'd say.
How long did it take you to cover the distance from where you were when the vehicle appeared and stopped and where your daughter was on the passenger side?
Maybe a few seconds, perhaps. It wasn't very long.
How are you feeling as you were approaching your daughter?
I was happy to see her. I was very happy to see her. Just like it always is. Like I haven't seen her. Like you haven't seen her in a couple of weeks, and I was really happy to see her.
How long did you interact with her physically?
Not very long, at all. Just kind of like in and out, maybe just a few seconds, and then it kind of hit me. I'm like, oh crap.
You made a mistake.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, Mr. Cooper. This is Jenna, the court reporter talking. I just realized my computer is almost dying and my cord is upstairs. Can I just run up and grab it? It'll take me 2 secs.
Well, sir, it might be
to take a 10-minute adjournment, particularly for the interpreters. So we'll take a 10-minute break.
Thank you, sir.
This hearing is adjourned for 10-minute break. an adjournment.
I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, that's my fault.
Mr. Norn, just describe your constituency a little bit, where you grew up. Looks okay. Denunukwe.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I was born here in Yellowknife, but I spent the majority of my childhood in Denunukwe, Fort Resolution, with my great-grandparents.
So just for the benefit of the adjudicator, Mr. LaPrairie, just give us some basic information. The size, the isolation, particularly of Lutz, okay? Tell us a little bit about your constituency and your constituents so that we can understand a little bit more about you.
To start geographically, it's a huge riding. I think I actually double-checked the stats, and it's like 8 times the size of Israel. It's huge. It has a few mines on it, and a bunch of other developments that happen on this riding. But in terms of people, it covers 4 communities. It covers, of course, Denunukwe, Hlutselk'e, Dilo, and Deda.
That's very, it's very diverse. I didn't know that you represented Dilo and Deda as well. How would you describe these communities? Are they modern? Are they traditional? Where in the range of communities, particularly in the north, would they fall?
It's been like this for probably since time immemorial. People still live off the land. It's not as much as it used to be, but people still go hunting. People still do some trapping. They still fish. So yeah, we still try to follow those customs. So just so you know, I guess it's kind of the history on it. So the 4 communities are inside the Quechua territory, so that's the significance of the riding.
I understand that your first language was other than English.
Yeah, my first language is Denisovan Chippewa. That's what I was raised on when I was a young boy, and thank goodness. I have to say I don't speak it as well as I used to, but I understand every word that's spoken to me by the elders, so I could converse with them readily in my language if I need to. Just a lot of times just to get some basic information off of them, especially when I deal with the elderly constituents. So that's something I'm quite proud of.
Would you describe your upbringing as fairly traditional, fair degree of hunting and trapping?
Yes. Yeah, just when I was up maybe till my great-grandfather died, but after that was not so much. My great-grandmother, again, she wasn't too mobile to get out in the land. We definitely did do some traveling with my uncle and whatnot, but after my great-grandfather died, what was not the same.
I'm just going to go back to the timeline. Around April 14th, I understand that you picked up a package at your ex's house, Natasha Schwind's house. Remember that?
A package.
Your clothes.
Oh yeah, I think that might have been a different date, but yeah, I remember picking up some clothes and some personal items I had to pick up.
Now, how did you arrange that pickup?
I just called Tash. Hey, I left some stuff over there. I think I still have some stuff there. And yeah, I just called Tash. Hey, can you put this stuff outside? I'm going to come grab it. Thank you very much. And
you drove there?
I think I walked there that time.
Right, because the 2 houses, your residence and her residence, at least at that time, were described as a block or 2 away from each other?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So when you walked to Natasha's house to retrieve that package, did you interact with anybody along the way?
No, I don't recall doing that, no.
Did you get some fresh air?
Yes, I did.
Did you interact with Natasha when you picked up the package?
No, I just kind of went in and out. Like, she's got little I'm trying to describe it the best I can. So there's a little, again, I mentioned earlier, there's a little kind of courtyard, but when you go in, like she has like a little, like open vestibule, I guess. It's not, it's like open, like a big metal, it's like a porch. So she put something on that, like that cement porch, and you could see it in plain view, and I just grabbed it.
Did you interact with your daughter when you were at Natasha's house on that occasion?
No, I didn't.
Did you even see her on that occasion?
No,
Did you see Natasha on that occasion?
no.
And what did you do after you retrieved the package of clothing?
I brought it home. Yeah, it's close by, so yeah.
Did you have any interaction with anybody on your trip back to your home?
No.
There's been a lot of discussion about your trip to the Legislative Assembly building on April 17th. You went there to pick up, as I understand it, your glasses and maybe a piece of paper, a consent form of some sort?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, like I do a lot of like older constituents who don't do a lot with the electronic documents. So I like to have hard copies of these consent forms readily available because I know it was going to get busy. At the time, I didn't know at the time, but because usually Mondays and Tuesdays are usually quite busy for me, anyways. It's there's usually forms that need to be signed.
And you thought that your isolation had been completed on that date?
What date was that?
April 17th?
Originally, yeah. Like I said, I counted the days and then, yeah.
Okay, now I appreciate that you understood differently later, but on the 17th, when you went to the Legislative Assembly, you thought that your isolation was complete. Is that right?
I originally, initially, yes. Again, hindsight, I would have went back and called public health or somebody, even my doctor, just to double check. But it was I guess at the time it was a Saturday, and I didn't know. I would, like I said, I would have called ahead of time if I knew.
Other than the letter that was generated as a result of the approval of your self-isolation plan on April 2nd, did you receive any other communication before April 18th saying that your isolation would end on April 18th?
Aside from the letter, no. I know that we kept getting calls throughout we got like 3 or 4 calls in between because there are certain intervals where they do symptom checks, and that was what I recall.
And during any of those calls, did any of the people who you spoke to say that you have a certain number of days left, or that April 18th was the end of your isolation?
Not the initial calls. What the call we got was like, this is day 14 of your isolation, and I was like, okay, thank you. I don't have any symptoms, and left it at that.
Okay, that was on April 18th though, right?
Yes.
So between April 2nd, when I understand the letter was sent to you approving your self-isolation plan, and April 17, when you went to the Legislative Assembly, did you receive any official communications, written or oral, suggesting that April 18th was in fact the end of your isolation?
I have to look back through my records, but yeah, I don't know. I don't recall.
So you remember getting periodic communications, official communications by telephone. You don't recall any of those individuals saying you're on day whatever and that your isolation ends on April 18th.
I do. So yeah, I do remember getting like when Stats Canada called and you're like, they'll say this is day 2 or this is day whatever day it was of your isolation, and I don't recall hearing, oh, you have X amount of days remaining.
Did the callers identify the location from which they were calling?
Yeah, they said they were from the south. They didn't specifically say where, but they did say they were not from the territories. Yeah. One thing I think it's important to add to, just because I think there was.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Norn.
Yeah, one thing I do recall seeing is about a week after my diagnosis, Department of Health came out with this poster, kind of schematic, showing this is day 1 of your isolation, and then it showed 15 days of isolation afterwards, and that was kind of additionally confusing. But that was what they showed what the clear lines were of when to isolate, when you're allowed to leave isolation.
Do you recall seeing anything specifically in writing between April 2nd and April 17, identifying April 18 as the end of your isolation?
Aside that from the letter you're referring, I don't recall.
So you went to the Legislative Assembly on the understanding that you had completed your isolation. And from your evidence thus far, and others, Mr. Brain in particular, it appears that you were following all of the COVID protocols. Is that right?
Yes.
You had on your mask, correct?
Yes.
You saw that Mr. Brain had his mask on when you attended?
Yes.
We saw in the video that you sanitized your hands.
Correct.
Were you making an effort to keep socially distant from Mr. Brain while you were at the Legislative Assembly?
Yeah, usually when I go up to when I sign in, I usually speed up. I usually walk pretty fast up the stairs. That's kind of my thing. Yeah, I don't recall if the door was locked or not. Because there's another. When you enter that side of the building, there is a glass door that needs to be. There's a proximity key, and I believe I got a temporary one to swipe, but that's something you'll have to check with the security records. I don't recall how much of a spacing I had between myself and Mr. Brain.
Okay, but were you thinking about COVID protocols when you went to the Legislative Assembly?
I was, yes.
And were you trying to stay socially distant from Mr. Brain?
I remember I wasn't going crazy far away from him. I was cognizant of the distance. I try to keep that. Yes.
And did it appear to you that Mr. Brain was similarly attempting to maintain the social distance advice of 6 feet or 2 meters or 1 hockey stick? I think I've heard it.
Yeah, I don't recall. I know the only time we did kind of get close was when we entered the building, and then when I entered my office, and that was the only 2 times I really had any sort of close-ish contact.
You and I understand Tricia Smith received an email at just after 2 a.m. the morning of April 18th. You remember that email?
Yeah, I saw that later that morning. Yes.
And that's the screenshot that has previously been entered as Exhibit 35, in which it says, as Mr. LaPrairie read into the record, in essence, "Hello, Stephen. According to your date of arrival, this is day 14 since entering the N.W.T. You must confirm whether or not you're experiencing any symptoms." So you remember receiving that at around 2:04 a.m.?
Yeah, I saw it the next morning. Yes.
Roughly what time did you see that email?
Oh, darn. When I got up, maybe perhaps, I'm going to say 8 or 9 that morning. And I'm like, oh, awesome. I thought this is good. Like I said, I was showing in, I felt fine. I had no symptoms, and yeah, I felt that my isolation was over.
Did you receive a call from anybody that day associated with your isolation plan?
Yeah, that was another one from Stats Canada, I believe, where they say this is day 14 of the. We want to make sure that you're not noticing any symptoms and I'm feeling fine.
How long after you woke up and read the 2 a.m. email did you receive the phone call from Stats Canada?
I'm going to say later by early afternoon.
And my understanding of your evidence thus far, which is consistent with others, I might add, you, though, thought that the email was the confirmation you needed that you were done your isolation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you talk to Tricia Smith about the fact that your isolation plan had now been completed that day?
Yeah, like so like this is kind of nice. You know, we were running low on food and we needed to get some groceries and, you know, get on with our routine.
Did Tricia Smith indicate that she thought the isolation would continue for the rest of the day into the 19th?
No, we talked about this. It looks like it was done by 2:00. I think it looks like we're good to go. And
did you have any doubt about that at that point on April 18th?
I had no doubt. I felt very confident. Like we felt that was the end time. Yeah.
Mr. LaPrairie was talking to you about your retrospective view of your visit to the Legislative Assembly. At that point, did you realize that you had gone to the Legislative Assembly before your isolation was complete?
Yes, I remember. I was trying to figure out how the timelines went. The key with the whole part, as I mentioned earlier, was the conversation with Glenn Rutland. And we talked a little bit about everything that went down with around that time, and he told me that, yeah, Steve, it looks like you went to the ledge on the 17th. I'm like, oh, that can't be. I felt I went there. I honestly felt that I counted the days, but I thought it was good. And he said, no, it's they've got video footage. I was like, oh darn. And
when did that conversation with Mr. Rutland take place?
I'm saying again, timelines are really fuzzy on it. For me, like I said, I was so tired around that time. Oh darn. I know.
Let me suggest this, Mr. Norn. Can you relate it to when you received the positive COVID result? Was it before or after that event?
It was after that event.
Okay. The same day, a day later, do you remember?
I'm fairly certain it was later that evening when I was in isolation. I remember making a couple of calls to a couple of the members of the Legislative Assembly.
When you say the evening of, what, the evening of the positive result?
Yeah, the Wednesday, yeah.
The 21st of April? Where's that calendar? So Wednesday shows on my calendar for that week as April 21st.
Yes, that's correct.
That sound right?
Yep.
And you had taken the COVID test, which resulted in the positive result, the day before on the 20th, the Tuesday?
That's correct.
And Mr. Rutland told you that he had already viewed the videos, or somebody had viewed the videos and saw that you had been there on April 17th?
That's correct.
Did you ask Mr. Rutland what he did with that information?
I do remember us having conversations like I said, I felt I was within the timelines. He's like, no, you weren't. And that's when he told me about the tape. So somebody did film it. He didn't disclose who. He was reported back to him. I guess they checked the logs as well. There's a visitor log that we have to sign in and out of, or that the security personnel do.
Well, let's talk about that log. You knew that every time you entered the building, the time of your entry and the time of your departure would be recorded to the minute, right?
Yes.
And you knew that at least one of the cameras would capture your entrance and your exit from the building, correct?
Yes.
Were you trying to hide the date that you went to the Legislative Assembly?
No, I did not. I actually thought there was more cameras covering different areas of the building, but I guess at the time I was really surprised.
Are you fairly certain it was on the Wednesday, the day that you got the positive result, that you had that conversation with Mr. Rutland?
Again, fuzzy. If it was not that date, it was the 22nd, but I'm fairly certain it was the 21st, the evening of. Mr. Rutland will probably better answer that.
Well, he apparently won't be attending. Did Mr. Rutland say that he was going to contact anybody associated with Protect N.W.T or the contact tracing service?
No, I didn't mention it from what I recall, but I did end up finding out later.
You had a conversation with Premier Cochrane at some point about your COVID diagnosis, correct?
Yes.
Approximately when was that? What day?
It was the day before. I know, like I told her, like when I first was positive, and I recall talking to her assistant, Charlene Woodward. Do remember that, and they got back to me, and I guess there were some discussions that I didn't know about, but I know that evening before my press release, that's when we had the conversation that I should come forward.
Okay, and that's the press release that you issued on April 23rd?
Yeah. Yes.
Mr. LaPrairie was asking you about the origin of that press release, and I'm not entirely sure that the evidence came out clear. Traditionally, who wrote press releases for members of the Legislative Assembly in the Northwest Territories?
Usually we have a big part to do with that, and then from there it's usually just, again, we try to help us stay within our parameters of what the message we're trying to get across. They're the PR experts, and they kind of help us edit if we need to, grammar, that sort of thing, and then we usually release after that.
So was this somebody at the clerk's office that helped you put together this press release?
Yeah. Yes.
And that was I think her name was Diane that you mentioned earlier?
No, it was very likely Danielle Mauger and one of the other, and one of her people that works under it could have been, there's another lady there was there at the time, and it could have been Glenn Rutland sitting on this as well. They usually put their heads together because it's, 2 or 3 heads are better than one.
Did this press release get drafted and released in any way connected with your previous day's conversation with the Premier?
Yes.
Okay, so what happened? What was let me back up. Who initiated the conversation? You or the Premier?
The Premier called me.
And did she state the purpose of the call?
Just we just had a brief discussion. She advised me that people within the S.N.W.T already know it's this. A lot of people are becoming aware that you're positive, so it'd probably be best to come forward.
The Premier said that a lot of people within the government, the S.N.W.T, were aware that you were COVID positive.
Yeah, certain people are aware that within S.N.W.T.
Go ahead.
I already disclosed to with a few of the members that I had it. I wanted, I said, I wanted to let them know right away. I didn't want to find out from another source.
Okay. Did Premier Cochrane tell you her source of information that you were COVID positive?
No, I believe I told her at that point.
When she phoned you to talk to you, did she know that you were COVID positive?
Oh. There was you're she would know for sure because I would have told, like, I was trying to get a hold of Charlene, as I mentioned earlier, Woodward, and get hold of the premier around that time. Again, this is really testing my memory because, like I said, I was very, very sleep deprived and very tired around this time. Like,
Why were you sleep deprived? Why were you so tired at that time, Mr. Norn, on or around April 22nd?
I was worried about my family. I was alone. I felt powerless to help my family. I was worried sick. And like I said, if I had known, not like know now what I knew then, like, I would have turned off my phone. I would have got a proper sleep and took better care of myself around that time because my mental health was not like I was so tired. I remember like, I think it was finally that Friday night, I finally, my body like finally just shut down and I slept decently that night.
You were worried about your own mental health at that time? Is that what you said?
Yes, I was very, very tired. But more so, I'm more worried. Like, I was more worried about my family at that time because, around that time, like on the day after me, my daughters Sina and Natasha were also positive around that time, and I was worried sick about them, and that conversation was probably one of the most difficult ones too, as well, because Sina was crying, Natasha was crying, and I tried so hard to console them, and we talked for a long time, and I that's all I could think of, was just to make sure that my girls were okay. I just
You talked about you wish you had turned off your phone at that time. Why? Who was phoning you, Mr. Norn?
just like I got a lot of media requests, like friends, family. Some supporters called, reached out to me. Constituents were still reaching out to me for other stuff too as well. But I remember at that point I talked to my CM. Like, I remember talking to Thomas Lafferty and Pascal. I called them up and I said, "Listen, I need you to start fielding calls for me." Yeah.
For how long were you feeling like this? Mentally fried, I think you used the term, tired, worried about your mental health. What was the period of time in which you felt like that?
Jeez. For the remainder of the isolation.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
The remainder of the isolation, I think I was released on the 30th.
Of April.
Yeah. I was not allowed to leave the room for that period of time.
So other than worrying about the health and well-being of your family, at the end of April, last 9 or 10 days, were there any other sources of stress or concern?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it was like the social media onslaught, I remember having specifically a conversation with Glenn. Yeah, I felt like it really did feel like Salem, Massachusetts. And I look out the window. Honestly, when I talk to Glenn, it feels like I'm half expecting to see, pitchforks and torches outside my place, and it was kind of my way of trying to be humorous because that's just my nature. But it was half kind of how I felt at the same time. It was not a pleasant time.
And it was within this context that the Premier Cochrane, contacted you by telephone, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what did she have to say to you at that time?
To come forward.
So she obviously knew at that point.
Yeah.
And what did you understand by her statement that you needed to come forward?
I knew at the time, it was, it was probably the right thing to do to let people know. It was just, but how we had our conversation, it was convincing enough for me, like, I better do it. At the same time, I struggled with juggling my family's privacy as well. That was what I struggled with,
Did you issue the press release voluntarily, or did you feel pressure to do so?
I most definitely felt pressured
From whom?
from the Premier.
What was the Premier's tone when she was speaking to you about the necessity to put out this press release?
I guess it was like, I guess it was the rumors were already starting within, with the government. Again, hindsight of like always 2020, I don't know what I would do if I was put in that position again, knowing what I know now.
But I'm interested in the nature of the conversation. Was it a cordial conversation with the Premier? Did she seem angry or agitated or supportive or otherwise? So give me some sense of the tone of the call.
It was fairly stern out. It wasn't. If you get to know the Premier a little bit, she's doesn't usually carry that tone, but it was fairly. I remember it was a stern conversation. It was a direct one. It wasn't a terribly long one. But I still remember saying, you should come forward, and that's what kind of one thing I really remember through all this.
Did you feel that the Premier gave you a choice in terms of whether to put out a press release or not?
Honestly, it didn't feel like it at the time.
Did she indicate any consequence for you refusing to do so?
No, I think it was kind of I felt it was more inferred, just because there's so many people that already knew within the S.N.W.T.
Did you feel that she was putting, the Premier that is, was putting any pressure on you to put out the press release?
Yes.
Was there anybody within the Legislative Assembly, including the clerk's office, to which you felt you could turn for support in deciding whether to comply with the Premier's request or not?
Yeah, Glenn Rutland. So now that was when, after that conversation, I did call Glenn, because I was in isolation. We had to bounce back emails off each other, and I know that's what I recall now, saying we had to put something out, and that's what we did for that the 23rd.
And how much of this press release did you actually draft yourself?
I just gave him like the timelines, and then again I probably had just like the timelines. I probably had to do with that was the main part of it.
What was the principal purpose of this press release? Was it to give your whole COVID history during isolation, or was it simply to identify that you were a patient that was positive in the Northwest Territories?
I think it was mainly just to show people that I was a patient, I know that we had some other business we had going on around that time, and I can't recall.
Did the Premier ask you to include any other information, such as your recent visit to the Legislative Assembly on April 17th?
Don't recall that. Just the main thing message that was I think conveyed was to come forward.
But what does that phrase, as you understood it, come forward mean?
To disclose my name in public, that I had a positive COVID diagnosis.
Did anybody, including Mr. Rutland, suggest that you should identify that you had been at the Legislature on April 17th in this press release?
I don't recall.
Now, go ahead, Mr. Norn.
Yeah, can we just go back to refer to that press? Oh, I think I got it here. Is that the Exhibit 5 you were referring to?
Yes, I'm referring to Exhibit 5, which is the press release that was issued under your name on April 23rd, 2021?
Yeah, I was mainly just going back to thinking about this. I was mainly involved in the timelines. So there's a couple of other just statements that were added weren't added by myself.
Okay, can you identify what those statements are?
I think the last two paragraphs, last few sentences, like the timelines are mostly me. I had part of, and again, like I said, they're very good at the clerk's office. That is to clean up the grammar, that sort of thing.
Okay. Did Mr. Rutland or anybody at the clerk's office suggest to you to include any other information connected with your isolation plan that had just ended?
No, but I think the biggest point I think we wanted to do here was to just keep this brief and to the point, and I think that was the main goal.
Okay, so Mr. Rutland by this time knew from you and the surveillance tape and whoever reported your attendance that you had been to the Legislative Assembly on the 17th, correct?
Yes.
Did you guys discuss including that information in the press release?
For that 17th?
Yes.
Oh, darn. I don't recall.
Are you fairly certain that Mr. Rutland saw the press release in its final form before it went out to the media and the public?
Yes, usually they're pretty good at reviewing their stuff before they send it out.
And did anybody from the clerk's office, Mr. Rutland or otherwise, contact you after the final draft was prepared before it went out to the media and the public, suggesting that it was inaccurate or incomplete in any way?
Oh, again, around this time, I don't have any recollection of having that kind of conversation. So I'm just making sure my computer's working properly. Here's something. Can we just give me a moment, please? Yeah. Okay, I think we're okay. Here, hang on. Oh, darn it. Sorry about that. Excuse me.
Can we proceed?
Mr. Norn?
Yeah, my apologies.
Are you ready, Mr. Norn?
Yeah, I dropped an item here. We're good now. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, sir. Was it suggested to you by the Premier or the Clerk's office or anybody else at the Legislative Assembly that you should tender a further public statement after the public statement that you issued or was issued on your behalf on April 23rd?
I'm trying to think back through that. I don't recall having that kind of conversation at all.
And was it common practice for the Clerk's office and or the Premier's office to suggest that you generate certain public communications? Was that part of their interaction with you?
Usually what we'll do is, like I said, because it's going to be under my name, I'm the ultimate one that signs off on that.
But I'm just wondering, as the events were unfolding at the latter part of April and even the beginning of May, did the Premier contact you or anybody on her behalf suggesting that you should issue another press release to give even more information?
I don't recall.
What about anybody at the clerk's office? Did they contact you after the issuance of the April 23rd press release suggesting you should issue another press release with more information?
I might have to take a look through my email records to know for certain.
Or what do you recall? Do you recall anybody saying, Steve, you should put out another press release and give a whole bunch more dates and information?
No, I don't recall.
Now, you thought that your isolation ended during the morning of April 18th. We've established that.
Yes.
Thereafter, you went to Sue Ellen's house with a package, I understand, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm not going to go into all of the intricacies that have already been examined, but did your hands actually touch as you transferred the package to her?
No, we did not. No.
And were you still practicing good COVID protocol, even though your isolation was done?
No, I try to use some, some caution. I mean, there was still everybody I know people are all still uncertain around that time. It was still COVID out there, and yeah.
And on the 18th of April, you also went to the Racket Club, as I understand it.
Yep.
That was on the basis that you similarly understood that your isolation was over, correct?
Yes.
You had no interaction with anybody there, as I understand it?
I walked by somebody in the hall in fairly close proximity, one of the members, and where the sauna is located, it's kind of out of the way. I was in there for
Go ahead.
I was in there for about maybe, like I said, 45 minutes, as I said earlier, ish. Yeah.
Did anybody else enter the sauna while you were there?
No, but I do recall an individual that was waiting for me to be done.
Were there any rules at the Racket Club for the use of the sauna in terms of number of people?
Yeah, I think you're only allowed one at a time, and yeah, that's what I recall.
What about the change room? Did you use the change room in the Racket Club when you went there to use the sauna?
Yes.
Was there anybody else in the change room, either when you entered to go into the sauna or when you exited after the sauna?
I know there was two in there. I remember saying hi, like I mentioned earlier. I said hi to one of the members, and I exited the building after that.
Did you wear a mask when you entered the building?
Oh darn! I don't recall. I'm pretty certain I was.
Do you remember if you sanitized your hands when you entered the building?
I remember but I remember going downstairs. I remember I'm pretty sure I used tap to pay to use the sauna. And I went downstairs, just washed my hands quickly, got into my gear, and then went into the sauna.
The individual that you say you walked past as you entered the Racket Club, how long were you within any real proximity of that individual? Was it just a walk by?
Just a walk by, literally just yeah.
Did you say anything to that individual?
Just hey, how's it going? And one of those.
And do you remember if they were wearing a mask?
I don't recall. I don't think they were.
When you were speaking to Ollie Williams at Cabin Radio, had that interview been arranged in any way?
No, just out of the call the blue, like I mentioned before. The number was pretty similar to one of my relatives. I thought it was because at the time my brother was calling it from different numbers. So I figured it might have been him, and yeah, I was kind of surprised. It was a surprise call.
Did you intend to be interviewed by Mr. Williams when he called you?
No, as I said, I was trying to sleep. I was like trying desperately to get some rest, and I was, yeah.
As I understand Mr. Williams' evidence, he says that he called you, there was no answer, or it was busy. You called him back. I understand from your evidence you thought it was a relative.
Mm-hmm.
And then I understand that he called you back after that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's how it went down. Yeah, I don't recall, but I remember him calling me and picking up at some point.
And your state of mind at the time that Mr. Williams called you that day?
I was tired. Like I said, I was sleep deprived, and yeah, I was trying desperately to get sleep.
Beyond being tired, what was your mental state when Mr. Williams called?
I was really worried about my children. I wish I could have, I felt powerless. It was just like it was a state of. I felt panicked. Like I felt powerless and panicked is the best way to describe it.
Did you feel obliged to give information to Mr. Williams when he called?
No, like I said, I didn't at the time. I just didn't know it was him until he identified himself.
Did you feel obliged to give him personal information about the status of your family?
No. These are my kids. I always it's our job to protect our kids.
Did Mr. Williams tell you that he was going to be using this information for purposes of writing a story?
No, but as a reporter, you figure that stuff is going to be. You assume that's the assumption why they're calling you to write a story.
Let me talk to you about the CBC reporter, Ms. Lamberink, I believe her name is.
Excuse me.
What time? 14.
Oh, sorry, so 19.
Go the other way.
Hold on.
What was your state of mind, your state of mental health? I'm not asking for your technical medical analysis, but your state of mind, your mental health on May 4th, 2021, when Ms. Lamberink called you.
Again, I was just tired. And I guess it's important for the record to know that that later on, like I did get diagnosed with PTSD. Worked with a counselor because this was a difficult time. I did seek help through counselor, and later on, I think through my family doctor. And
You were diagnosed with PTSD on the basis of what, from your understanding?
Just through this, just talking to the counselors, they could be cumulative from. I used to work in emergency services too, could be, but this was definitely a contributing factor to the diagnosis for sure. Like I said, I'm not a medical expert, but they figured it could be cumulative, and this was just kind of a catalyst towards that diagnosis.
And when you say this, to what are you referring?
The whole ordeal of being in isolation and not being able to see my children, not being able to leave that room. It was basically, it was imprisonment with Wi-Fi. It was the equivalent to, that's the best way I could describe it.
Were there any other contributing factors to your PTSD as told to you?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm a former RCMP member, so that could have been partly it.
Sorry, I'm referring specifically to the events of April 2021. Did your counselor or your family doctor identify anything other than the isolation as contributing to what they said was PTSD?
It was mainly this this event.
Okay, but this event, are you referring just to the isolation? Are you talking to what was going on about your family? Are you talking about the media? Are you talking about the politicians?
All of it. Not so much the politicians. I mean, that's just what I knew what I signed up for that, but it was just the constant fear of knowing that, like, I think what really did it was, like, when your friends and family are generally worried about your safety and telling you you should not go out alone, that's not a fun way to be, like, to have, you can't to have the fear to, go out go for a walk, or go to the store, go to the convenience store, they can go someplace in public. It was, yeah.
I think in response to a question or two from Mr. LaPrairie, you identified as being under siege. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And what made you feel like you were under siege in April or early May of this year?
In early May, like, are you referring to after the isolation was completed?
Well, from the moment you returned to the Northwest Territories. But what made you, what elements of your life at that point made you feel, as you described, under siege?
It was, I know, a large part to a lot of the social media response, especially to a lot of the cabin radio stories. There was literally, I think, hundreds of comments. I think there was a YK rat and rave. I think a lot of that stuff's been taken down now. But it was awful. It was some nasty comments. Like, yeah, I didn't think that that would ever happen.
Were the comments just about you?
No, they were about my children too.
And you don't have to go into the names, but we know that at the time you had your 9-year-old daughter,
Yeah.
Sina. About whom else were the comments being made?
Miss Smith's daughter, Chaley.
How old is she, or was she?
16, I believe, at the time. And people were so mean. It was not pleasant.
Did she express any concerns about her own safety or concerns resulting from how the public or the media were treating you at the time?
Well, she didn't mainly communicate with me directly. Like, most of the stuff, that was expressed, like, for her concerns were through Miss Smith, Tricia.
Did this the fallout impact Tricia Smith's daughter, as far as you know?
It affected all of us.
Okay. Did she receive any sort of threats or feel at any point unsafe as a result of what was happening to you?
I don't know. She's a tough kid, but she did get the threats at school, and there was a lot of name calling, a lot of online stuff. I didn't see him directly, but that was just what was reported to me.
Okay, so what was reported to you, did you understand that was in any way connected to the whole COVID story that had developed around you in April of this year?
Yes.
Did you talk to Natasha about any impacts on her or your daughter?
Yeah. She, like, it was, like I said, it was so nerve-wracking. Like, again, there was a lot of calls where they were crying, and I felt I couldn't be there for them. I couldn't console them. I couldn't. That was one of the hardest parts. And
What about Tricia Smith, with whom you were living during this particular period of time? Did she express any concerns to you about her own safety or how people were treating her, either virtually or actually?
It was disgusting, but oh, the COVID enforcement team harassed her a great deal. Went to her work. She didn't want to speak to them.
What about from the general public or the media? Did she have any repercussions as a result of this story?
Yeah, people like just said just a lot of just lots of rumors. I didn't see it. Like I said, a lot of it I didn't see. But it was really hard on her. Like there was a lot of times when she was crying to her, and at least I was there to for the most part console her. But it did affect our relationship because we're no longer together now.
Was that in any way connected in your mind to what happened in April of this year?
It certainly didn't help, but yeah, I'd say it's connected.
When you had conversations with the COVID tracing team, were you trying to deceive them?
And I mentioned this before, like that those few days I was running on fumes mentally, and I told him like, if I remember something, I'll let you know, and I'm pretty sure at some point I did express concerns about like my mental health at the time too, because like I said, I was tired, like, and
You
yeah.
did make mistakes in some of the dates in your conversations with the COVID tracing team, correct?
Yes,
But were those mistakes, Mr. Norn, the result of trying to mislead the COVID tracing team?
absolutely not.
What, in your view, was the source of the errors?
A lot of mixed messaging. Like I said, we got different calls from different people, and again, like I said, like that's just how they that was how they were operating at the time. And like I said, I have the utmost respect to them. Their job is very exhausting, and you can't just have any one person doing the same job like all the time, I guess is the best way to say it. There's a lot of there's just some contact tracing going on around that time. It wasn't probably just me. So
I'm not sure you answered directly my question.
sorry.
Why did you make the mistakes that you now realize you made with respect to your reporting of dates and events and people to the contact tracing office?
I wasn't in the best mental state. I was like I was so tired. I was so exhausted around the time that I was getting calls. That's and it yeah, like honestly, that was part of the main factor that
Did you intentionally strike that? Did you lie knowingly? Did you lie to the nurses?
absolutely not.
Did you lie to the epidemiologist?
No,
Did you give the epidemiologist incorrect information?
I went off the best information I had at the time. Again, I said I was trying to recall the dates, times, and I was not in a good state then mentally.
Sir, I'm just going to ask for 10 minutes to consult with my associate and hopefully bring my examination of Mr. Norn to a close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. You will have 10 minutes. We'll adjourn for 10 minutes, Madam Clerk.
Sir?
This hearing is adjourned for 10 minutes. This hearing is now resumed.
Thank you, Madam
Mr.
Clerk.
Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Adjudicator. Just a couple of what I expect to be quick matters, and then I propose, sir, after that to deal with the new matters that were raised just today. So before we get there, Mr. Norn, you accept that you made some mistakes, correct?
Yes.
You accept that you made a mistake by interacting with your daughter on April 8th, correct?
Yes.
Do you accept responsibility for that mistake, sir?
Yes.
You accept that on April 17th, by entering the Legislative Assembly, in retrospect, was an error, correct?
Correct.
Do you accept responsibility for that error?
Yes.
Sir, you appreciate that you made certain mistakes in your interactions with the contact tracing office, correct?
Yes.
You included some erroneous dates as to your activities, correct?
Yes, and I gave explanation why.
You accept that you made those mistakes,
Yes.
and you accept responsibility for those mistakes.
Yes.
You accept that you should have reported your mistakes on April 8th and April 17th in a more proactive and timely fashion, correct?
Yes.
And you accept responsibility for failing to do so.
Yes.
Sir, I have no further questions of Mr. Norn, other than he apparently wants to say something.
Mr. Cooper, Mr. Norn just raised his hand. He may want
Yeah,
to say
I
something.
just saw that. Mr. Norn, go ahead.
I think it's important to note too, as well, to the public and to this inquiry that I did receive notice from the Department of Health that myself and my family's medical records were breached at least 3 separate occasions. And I thought that should be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norm, for bringing that to my attention.
Okay.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes, sir. This morning, these days are starting to blur together, but I think this morning I received a new notice separate from the one that was essentially dismissed, in which there are 3 additional allegations.
Mr. Cooper?
I hesitate to interrupt you, but you're aware that those communications are confidential.
I am very aware, and I don't propose to disclose the contents, but rather the need to deal with them in all of the circumstances. It might be, and I look to Mr. LaPrairie and Mr. Barclay for guidance, that we deal with those as an in-camera matter and to deal with them more generally, depending on your decision in that regard, sir.
Well, from my perspective, as long as it's not disclosed what was said in that confidential communications, as opposed to dealing with the matters, the advice is meant to put you on notice. So
I understand that, and without skirting the facts, the matters, and there are 3 of them that have been added, were added after my client was already under oath and therefore not available to me to seek advice or to even advise him of the additional information, which means, obviously, I wasn't able to, nor should I, be examining him on something that is more recent. As you know, we've complained vociferously and ineffectively. Another matter has arisen for which we have been unable to do anything with. This has the unique element, and I appreciate it was generated more recently, that we haven't been able to consult our client or receive any instructions. And therefore, sir, I'm asking for the ability to do that. But more importantly, we want to submit that nothing in the new information is that which falls within the terms of reference. At a very minimum, I need to talk to my client about this before entirely discharging him from the witness list and in advance of any further testimony.
I certainly think that's fair in respect to wanting to consult with your client. And I would therefore be able to, I would make an amendment to my order that he can't discuss his evidence with anybody. But it would be on the distinct understanding, it would be restricted to the matters in the notice. So I'm going to allow you to discuss this matter with your client. Would you prefer that we deal with the matter first thing tomorrow morning?
I think that's probably good. I suspect everybody, not the least of which my client, is tired. He's been on the stand
And I don't
all
know
day.
if it's going to take very long. It's not that complex, and I'm prepared to deal with it perhaps at 9 o'clock in the morning.
At 9 a.m. And then the remainder of the day, I presume, will be taken up depending on whether we need to examine Mr. Norn any further with respect to the other witnesses that we've asked attend.
What I'd like to know, Mr. Cooper, I don't expect, just excluding this issue, that those witnesses are going to take very long. Mr. LeBray won't be asking any questions. And when I authorized the subpoena, it was on the distinct understanding that their evidence was restricted, and it's reflected in the transcript, to very narrow issues. When I'm saying this, I'm just looking at the schedule tomorrow.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you too, when I am scheduling, as to whether or not you'll be calling, other than potential possibility of Mr. Norn having him recalled on this issue that you've raised, will you be calling any other witnesses?
I don't expect so, sir. I do expect that Ms. McPherson will not be very long. With respect to the good doctor, I certainly expect to be a little longer.
Yeah. But it looks like we probably would be able to finish all the evidence by noon tomorrow.
I don't have a good record of predicting timelines when it comes to cross-examination. Is the implication that final submissions, closing arguments, as the case may be, would be made after that?
What is your wish, Mr. Cooper, in respect to arguments? And I'm going to give you a lot of leeway. Is your preference to do it orally, or would you prefer to file written arguments?
No, sir. My preference is definitely oral submissions. It seems to me that the type of evidence that's been tendered, the public interest in hearing the submissions rather than having to wade through what could be voluminous material, certainly mitigates in favor of oral submissions, and that certainly is our preference.
And how much time would you need to get ready for oral argument?
Our intention, sir, is to isolate all of the appropriate evidence and testimony, not surprisingly, to tie in with our submissions. We've been doing that as we've gone along. You're not expecting oral submissions tomorrow, I don't imagine.
No, not at all. That would be unfair, and would be dealing with two witnesses at least, and we have to deal with the issue that you've raised in respect to Mr. Norn and the possibility of referring to those three pieces of evidence. So that's going to take part of the day. How long did you need? Would you want to do it early next week, or?
Yes, my holdup, frankly, is I'm on a plane on Saturday and it's a long weekend. I'm not leaving the country, worry not from that perspective. I'm not back until Tuesday night, sir. So if Friday works a week tomorrow, we'll be more than ready. I will be out of the office entirely until Wednesday morning. Is that agreeable,
The
sir?
issue, and I'm not aware of, is that whether we can use these facilities when the legislature is sitting. Do you have any knowledge of that? We'd have to ascertain, we'd do that first thing in the morning, as to what days are available that don't conflict with the sittings of the legislature. Friday, as far as I'm concerned, would be fine, but we'll have to ascertain what is the situation with the legislature and whether we can use all these facilities. So
my understanding is that they've adjourned the next sitting by a week.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm recalling, maybe Mr. Norn, you can help us out here, but my understanding is that the Legislative Assembly has put their session off for a week because of COVID. Is that right? You're muted, Steve.
Yeah, my apologies. I was going to have to double check. If you just bear with me for 2 seconds here, I could just take a look here.
Yeah, we'll all check on that, but if that's the case, as far as I'm concerned, then we could have oral argument on next Friday, and the public can hear the argument. I agree with you, Mr. Cooper, that this hearing is public, and the public has a lot of interest in it, so having the argument oral, I think, would help us all, and would be fair to all those that have an interest in the inquiry.
And Mr. Halabi has confirmed online that the session has been adjourned to October 21st.
So should we adjourn till 9 or 9:30?
9:30.
We also have a new interpreter, so I'm going to adjourn until 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Thank you, sir.
Good night.
This hearing stands
Good night, all.
adjourned. This hearing stands adjourned.
Steve Norn has to stand up. Steve?
Sorry, I didn't really hear anything. Am I still under oath right now?
Well, your counsel has left, so we shouldn't be
We
talking.
did indicate to your counsel that there's one matter. He's an officer of the court, and he knows that he can't be discussing all the evidence with you except this one issue, so you'll have to talk to him.
Officer of the court?
No, what I'm saying is that you may be recalled on a very narrow issue. It won't take that long, but that'll depend a lot on your counsel and what I do tomorrow.
Okay.
So there is a possibility, but it won't be for very long.
Okay. Thank you.
But you're now free to leave.
Okay. Thank you.
This hearing is now adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.